I first heard about Vanishing Point from my first publisher and first producer, a man named Jimmy Bowen. He had a publishing company that was really remarkable. It was very small. Don Henley, Glenn Fry, J.D. Souther, myself, my husband Dave Ellingson, Mike Settle. He came to us and said he wanted to show us a screening of a film that he was going to be supervising the music on, and wanted us all to participate in writing for the film, some of us singing. We'd see what happened. So we went, saw the screening, and he was there, and he would describe to all of us, all right, we need a piece of music here, we need a piece of music here, and we'd take notes, and that's how I kind of picked that particular spot and thought, okay, I'm going to go after trying to write something for this place.
In the old days, producers weren't artists. They were guys that came in with suits on, and they produced records the traditional way. They got studio musicians. Jimmy was not like that. He was the new breed of guy that would pick musicians that were authentic pickers, that, you know, weren't just reading charts, that would get involved in the music, and he was very hip, you know, and that made a difference in those days.
We really respected him, and he had a lot of experience. He also had a lot of, I'm not going to say he had a swagger, but he had kind of a southern western kind of a take charge sort of attitude, but at the same time, a lot of humor and very nice. And I remember him as being a very inspiring person creatively.
He always wanted to bring out the best in the artist, and he always had and has an uncanny way of knowing when you're on it vocally and not going past that point.
Jimmy Bowen sketched out the film and told me what it was about, and told me that it was an unusual film because it was semi-anti-establishment, a lot of rock songs in it, which was unusual at the time.
I think having a rock and roll soundtrack made it really unique, and also gave it its longevity. I just remember thinking, what a cool vehicle for all these songs. You know, that the movie had an edge to it. Not only the storyline, the rebellion, all that, but also the look of the movie had an edge that would lend itself to rock and roll songs. That it was just going to work really great.
I think the idea of having all rock soundtrack on a movie was, to me, very refreshing. And the fact that it was featured so much in Vanishing Point. I mean, you can have a rock thing happening way in the background, but the fact that this movie didn't have a tremendous amount of dialogue really let that music shine. And before then, I think it was a lot about beautiful scoring and maybe not getting in the way, like not drawing attention to itself. You know, you're in the middle of a drama, you don't want to be distracted by a song and pulled away from the drama. But in this kind of movie, just was wide open.
Usually when they had these guys, George Gershwin or Ira Gershwin, scoring music, now they were taking songs.
Well, in 1970, we had the emergence of some very interesting strains of music. A little bit of country rock is coming in. Folk rock had already really happened. But from folk rock, and we started getting bands that were a little country flavored. And it was really interesting then, because at that time, hippies and cowboys were really separated. You know, it was the right and left wing extremes. And country music people really did not like rock and roll people. But rock and roll people always kind of liked country, because rock and roll music came from a combination of country western and rhythm and blues.
In the press and music press, a lot of people were speaking ill of like the 70s, and there was a bad attitude about the 70s, partly because it had disco in it, and partly because there was a lot of sort of rock excess that was born and then bred throughout the 70s, but there was so much amazing rock music in the 70s. And you'll see, like, if you go now and you'll read articles on 70s rock music, a lot of people have sort of retracted that attitude now and are looking at it differently because they've looked at how much vitality was in 70s rock music and how much music was really discovered, how much experimentation went on in the 70s.
The relationship between John David Souther and Glenn Frey of Long Branch Pennywhistle, their relationship with Jackson Browne and with Bob Seger really did, I think, lay the groundwork for some of the writings of huge hits that would come later for the Eagles.
These are some of the great outlaws of rock and roll in a good way. An outlaw has a code. A criminal does not. These guys aren't criminals, but they're outlaws. And they've all gone on to very distinguished careers, obviously. The Eagles, on their brand new album, Long Road Out of Eden, their first single, How Long, is a J.D. Souther tune. FM radio was kind of like the people in the asylum took over the asylum for one purpose. They just wanted to play with the PA system. Yeah, that's all they wanted to do. We just wanted to play with the PA system. So we would do things like take Blowin' in the Wind from Bob Dylan and combine it with a speech from Dr. King. Now you've got a third thing that's bigger than the separation of the two. And our job was to take the message off the street, combine it with the message of the music, and put it out there so everybody could hear it, and it created its own force in that way. It was kind of like the community bulletin board. Of course, our news reports were, usually about the harvest in Humboldt, along with the body count in Vietnam. Somehow those both got in there. So it was a very creative time, and although we didn't take ourselves seriously, we took that medium very seriously because we knew we were speaking to people who not only loved music and wanted to rock and roll, they were also getting beat up and going to jail and marching to stop the war, marching for civil rights, marching for women's rights, and it was serious business.
In 1970, I was right in the thick of the Righteous Brothers thing, and I also had a separate contract with Columbia Records with Jerry Fuller. So I was on two major record labels at the same time. We played the Sands Hotel in Vegas. We played every major college. We were doing the Smothers Brothers show, the Glenn Campbell show. We did the Joey Bishop show. I was in the thick of, the high echelon of show business. I knew Jimmy Bowen through my producer, Jerry Fuller. They had been good friends for years. And Jerry called me one day, told me about the movie, and told me about doing a song in it. Jimmy already had the track recorded, and he figured I'd be good for singing it because of my style, which was the soul style. So we went and had a meeting with Jimmy in his famous bus, and we sat down and talked about it, and I said, sure, I'd love to do it. And I believe at that time he even played me a track. And I learned the song, Where Do We Go From Here, I believe in that bus. After I recorded the song, Jimmy brought me down to a huge sound studio, and I watched the whole movie. Now, mind you, this is the first time I'd seen it and had no idea how they were going to fit me into this whole thing. And during one of the major chase scenes, Cleavon Little played it and got all excited and was jumping around and said, this is the #1 record in the country. And it was, kind of cool. You think, well, I wish that was true.
FM radio began in 1967 in San Francisco with Tom and Rachel Donahue, and then it spread down here, and then it erupted across the country. And in that time period, radio personalities picked their own music. They took a lot of pride in finding new bands, new songs. We were constantly on the search to break new artists that we felt were worthy. And it was a complete departure from the top 40, very highly structured guys that talk like that, That's not what we were doing.
It was a time when disc jockeys had freedom, and it was a time when they could pick their own set lists to play. That ended sometime later when the corporations took over, and and they changed it, and the great DJs just went by the wayside and became puppets to me. Like Alan Freed, Murray the K, or Dick Biondi, or B. Mitchell Reed. Those guys could make you or break you. They had their choice. They had their show. Nobody told them what to do. They were celebrities. And so they would play who they thought was good. Like B. Mitchell Reed helped us. B. Mitchell Reed was a huge disc jockey in Los Angeles for KFWB. He used to come in to the Red Velvet and see us perform with the Knickerbockers, and we'd play Lies. And he said, "Give me the record." And he put Lies right on the radio. And I don't think you could do that today. In order to be a good DJ in those days, you had to have good taste in music. You had to have an ear for what was happening. A finger on the pulse. You had to know, you had to have that instinct that you'd hear a song and say, that's going to make it.
DJs would just play their favorite songs or songs they liked from albums. Whether the song were 3.5 minutes long or 14 minutes long was a new concept. Radio was up till then pop-driven and hit-driven. Even when it came to bands that made album-oriented albums, like the Beatles, for example, they still had hit singles, and that was how radio was driven. And radio at that time transformed into, or started to transform into Rock FM, where they would play, DJs would play whatever they wanted. And that kind of changed the face of radio. DJs became important. The taste of the DJ, what they liked, and why became important, because it changed the way people listened to music, and it changed people's opinions about music and bands and albums. And I remember the first time I recognized that very well, a very vivid memory, around the same period. There was a kid across the street from my house shooting baskets, and he had the predecessor to the boombox. It had one speaker, it was like a big radio, and it was pretty loud, and there was a guitar solo, and he was shooting baskets, playing basketball by himself, and this guitar solo was going on and on and on and on. It's probably like 7 minutes of a guitar solo, and then the band comes back in, and then the song ends, and then a voice comes on, and I was shocked by that, because I realized that's a radio station. That's not someone playing a tape. And I'd never heard radio. I didn't know there was such a thing as radio. And this voice comes on, starts talking about the song. And I immediately ran inside my house and was on my parents' stereo trying to find the FM band and trying to find what station that was and trying to find out how you listen to music like that on the radio, because I didn't know it was possible. That's my first recollection of the fact that you could listen to that kind of music on the radio. And it was pretty much brand new, I think, only a couple years old, that concept of radio then.
How much of a connection did I feel sitting in the chair? A lot, actually. It's an interesting thing, because you're sitting alone in a booth. Especially me, because I've always worked at night and preferred working at night, when you can really concentrate on the radio and listen to it. You're not at work and you're not doing other things. I always picture the person listening to me, whether it's true or not, as sitting in a darkened room with a lit candle and some incense, and they're listening. I never picture myself talking to hundreds of thousands of people. So I'm having a conversation with you, the listener. And after a while, people begin to feel like I'm their friend, which is great. In fact, for my whole career, my sign-off is thank you for listening and for being my friend, because I feel like that's what they are. They're not sheep. They're not cogs, they're not numbers, they're not demographics. These are people who let me into their lives. Delaney and Bonnie and Friends were big in 1970. I loved them, and we played them all the time. That song, Coming Home, I still play that song a lot, just because it's a great tune. It's got a great riff, Clapton playing guitar on it. They had a great vocal style, I thought. It was like down home, but it was rock and roll. It was country, but it was kick-ass. It always sounded like they recorded everything live. I don't know if they did or not, but they just had that quality to them that they were really singing their hearts out, you know. And I always loved that about them.
I met Delaney and Bonnie in a club in North Hollywood and spent some time talking to them, sat in with them, sang. They were that kind of southern rock feel but they were good at it. They were very, like an R&B band with a southern country flavor. The album that they did was a classic album, and it had Eric Clapton was on it, Little Richard was on it, and it was Delaney and Bonnie and Friends.
That first Bonnie and Delaney album is all I listened to at that time. I mean, for me, I'd never heard I'd never heard a girl sing like Bonnie. And she just blew me away. It was so, being part of the same soundtrack that she was on was really cool for me personally.
I just have to say, Bonnie was my idol. And so any chance to be involved with anything she was doing was very exciting. I just loved Bonnie Bramlett's let it rip kind of. I mean, she was just grounded. Every time she started singing, she just felt this, that she was just grounded in what she was doing, and she'd just open her mouth and let it just, She was a white girl who sounded black, just totally full of soul.
She's just got a very, very distinguished sounding voice. You can tell Bonnie Bramlett, you know, you can hear that voice and you know it's her.
I grew up playing blues and gospel, and then country also, and then threw the rock and roll in. So it all has a flavor of blues and gospel, I would say. But I love the rock and roll thing, so I just kind of married it together. A disc jockey was asking, "What do you call your music?" And I said, I don't know. It's just what I write, you know. Just, you know. And he kept saying, "Well, you got to have a name for it. This. And I said, "Well, I said, would you call it gospel?" I said, "No." "Would you call it blues?" I said, "No." "It's just plain rock and roll?" "No." So finally, Jimi Hendrix said, "I can tell you what you call it. That's why I'm here. Call it spiritual." So it just dropped everybody, and so that's what I said. Well, I guess that's it. The producer, I finished when he called me, and he said he'd like for me to do a gospel song in the middle of the desert on a flatbed truck, because it was like a hippie thing, you know. And I said, "Well, okay, you want me to do like a standard, you know, from the church book or something?" He said, "I don't care. If you've written one, you can do that." Or I said, "Why don't we just do it where it's really, really fresh? Since this is a fresh movie, I'll just write one on the way down." When I got there, I had it written, and I sang it to him, and he loved it. Girls were Claudia, Lanier, Bonnie, Rita Coolidge, my mom, and had David Gates on the piano. I read over it in the room 3 or 4 times, 5 or 6 times, whatever, and told him what to sing behind me, and what David I wanted to play gospel, and so he was really thrilled with that. And we got up there and just sang. We sang it for probably an hour, and that was it. To being in a desert, we were treated like royalty, and it was, you're talking desert. Snakes everywhere. So we were well protected and treated just wonderful.
I think people were always interested in what we were doing because it was so different. I don't know that they really knew exactly how to think about it. Just in terms of, you know, first of all, what is it? It's, you know, we've got elements of you know, Detroit soul. We've got elements, tiny bit of the jazz thing. We've got rock. And we're all girls, and we're sitting there with a guitar, and it should sound like folk, but it doesn't exactly. So I think they didn't know where to pigeonhole us, but they were always interested.
I moved to Park Avenue, and Corky Lang, my partner and drummer, came over, and he says, "We have to start thinking about writing songs for mountain climbing." So he had this lyric. Corky used to play in a place in Nantucket, and I don't know if this is bullshit, but the power went out, and he's playing the drums. That was the only thing you could hear. electric went out, and he saw a girl in some outfit dancing. So he started screaming, you know, Mississippi Queen, you know what I mean? He taught me everything. So in about 20 minutes, I wrote the music and the lick, and we went in the studio, and Felix Pappalardi, our producer and bass player, told him to count it off. He hit the cowbell, and that was it. It was 2 minutes and 26 seconds. And in fact, they were very smart. Usually when you put out a single in those days, people would put one song on one side and another song on the other side. Well, we put the same song on both sides, so no disc jockey could get creative and try to play some crap song on the B-side. He had no choice but to play that song.
Mississippi Queen is one of those FM radio hits like Freebird and Greengrass on High Tides and Stairway to Heaven. It will always get requested. It will always get requested. It will never go away. There's just something about it, you know. That's why Ozzy just covered it. You know, every once in a while, people find that riff or that moment, and it's captured. And that song is one of those moments in rock history.
My partner, rest his soul, Felix Pappalardi, produced that group, The Vagrants, I was in. I remember when he walked in the studio, you know, and his partner, who became our manager, Bud Prager, said this, we have this guy that's going to come in and produce you. I didn't know what a producer was, you know. And he walked in, and he had a mustache and that handkerchief around his neck. He looked like Sonny Bono, sort of. And then he produced 2 singles for us. They didn't go anywhere. And then years later, I'm in my apartment in Forest Hills, and I'm looking at this album called Disraeli Gears, Cream. And I'm looking at the credits, and I see produced by Felix Pappalardi, and I said to my brother, is this the same guy that produced our group, The Vagrants? My brother says, yeah. I said, well, how come we don't sound like Cream? He says, well, we suck. You didn't practice enough. I said, oh, that's what you got to do. He says, let's go see Cream at the Fillmore. I went to see Cream at the Fillmore. He said, but before we go, let's take some acid. And so help me God, when that curtain opened up and I heard Sunshine of Your Love, and I'm tripping my nut off, I slumped into my seat, and I said, we really do suck. You know, we didn't practice enough. So I went and practiced 6 hours a day, and then next thing I know, Felix was going to now try to produce an album for The Vagrants. He never did that, just 2 singles. We go in the studio. We didn't have enough songs. He had 3 weeks. Cream was already almost finished. And he says, look, I have 3 weeks. I got to go to England, produce Goodbye Cream. Cream's breaking up. Let me hear your songs. Well, we didn't have any songs. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, you know, we'll just write songs. 2 weeks later, I got together with these 2 guys, a drummer and an organ player, no bass player. I called Felix in England. He was at Jack Bruce's house or something. Over the phone, I played him some of the demos that we had done. He said, great. I couldn't believe that he actually could hear over the phone what I was playing him. Came back, and he came out to see us play at Stony Brook University. We were opening for Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The group was called Mountain. He didn't like the organ player and the drummer in the studio. So now he threw them out. So his partner, Bud Prager, says, Leslie's going to shoot himself if you don't do something. You can't throw him out 19 times. Why don't you play bass? So Felix played bass, and we did my first album, Leslie West Mountain, and then we were off and running. I remember when I went to see Vanishing Point, I think my manager told me one of your songs is in it. And when I saw it, you know, a naked chick on a motorcycle, I said, this is great. You know, usually when they use one of your songs in a movie, they stick it in the stupidest, you have no control of where they use it. And it gave me big props.
I just remember a bunch of us got together and drank a bunch of wine and went to the theater and again, being kind of a first film for most of us, first involvement, you had a bunch of people who were just starting out, so we were extra excited. I mean, it was really a big deal. It was big.
Our reaction to seeing it all together for the first time and hearing our music in it was not disappointing at all, because I've had that experience before where the mix sounds one way while you're doing it, and then it gets in the movie, and somehow the heart and the life goes out of it. But I think it was very powerful. We were excited.
When you first are approached with something like this, you don't really know the whole gist of it yet, and so when I saw it, I thought it hit me as a much bigger situation than I thought it was. I forgot about me singing in the movie because of the power of the movie, and it went on later on to be a cult classic.
It's amazing how many people send emails to my website or at a show will come up and say, I loved that movie Vanishing Point that you had songs in, and they still talk about it. So I think it hits a nerve every generation that comes along.
If it had been a terrible movie, I would have never lived it down, because that's all they talk about. Boy, I just saw Vanishing Point the other night on channel so-and-so. And yeah, it's really made a big dent in my life. It really has.
We could have had a song in a movie that was popular for 4 months and then was never talked about again. But instead, we have a song in a movie that lives and lives.
I ended up writing, which actually became my first cut, a song that Big Mama Thornton recorded, Sing Out Strong for Jesus. And then I ended up singing a song that Mike Settle wrote called Nobody Knows. That was the end title.
Big Mama Thornton was just one of these gospel preaching singers that had this huge voice that was uncompromising. She's one of the greats, just absolutely one of the great blues singers that ever lived.
Big Mama May Thornton. She wrote Hound Dog. Now, see, I love that whole genre of the blues mama, and to have a name like Big Mama May Thornton, come on, what's not to love there? I mean, a bottle of Jack Daniels in a smoky club in Big Mama May Thornton, you're in heaven, man. That's it. You're gone. Had it not been for people like that, and I want to say Willie Dixon again, and Big Mama May Thornton, and these people, that's where rock and roll came from. That's, somebody once said, a great blues singer once said, the blues had a baby and they called it rock and roll.
I wrote Sing Out Strong for Jesus specifically for the scene that it was in, knowing at the time Big Mama Thornton was going to be the voice to sing the song I wrote. She came in the studio. We had the track all cut, and she came in with her 2 boys, and they walked in, and we gave her the lyrics, played her the track, and she tried to sing it maybe 2 times. And what she's known for, her brilliance, is her ability to backphrase and always catch up just at the right moment. It wasn't working right at this point. It was like a little too far back. And at one point I remember thinking, is this just going to all go away because it just doesn't fit, it doesn't sound right? And she said, we're going to go away for about a half hour. We'll be back. We're just going to make a little run. So we thought, I hope she comes back. This would be a real bummer if she didn't. And about a half hour, came back holding a brown brown paper bag, went up to the microphone, took the biggest swig, and put the bag down and nailed it first time through. The vocal was what you hear in the movie and on the soundtrack, and it was incredible. And just when you would think that she backphrased so much, there was no way she was ever going to catch up and make that line work, she did. She was absolutely brilliant. Most of the time, it's more satisfying if I've written it. I'm much more connected to the song. This track, Nobody Knows, was definitely an exception. The first time Mike Settle played it for me, I knew it was perfect. I loved it and connected with it right away. Now, I didn't do the vocal at the same time the band put the track down, but it was right after. The band got the track, Bowen, the guys, everyone was happy with it, and then I went right in and did the vocal. So I was still feeling great just from thinking the track came out incredibly, and really anxious to just get up and sing it. I hadn't rehearsed it a lot and didn't really know how I was going to sing it, what kind of vocal was going to come out, and got in front of the microphone, heard the track, put the earphones on, and that's what came out. And I really hadn't figured that out until that moment. So, you know, as a singer, I think everybody I talk to is the same way. You always wait for that one vocal that is almost channeled through you. And in this case, that I would say that definitely happened. I loved singing that song. I love this whole soundtrack.